हम आने वाले टाइम में जेनेटिक डिजीजेस को डिलीट कर सकते हैं।
Like a computer file?
एग्जैक्टली जैसे कंप्यूटर से कोई फाइल डिलीट करते हैं।
Yeah.
क्या आगे बढ़कर क्या हम फ्यूचर जनरेशंस के डीएनए को डिजाइन कर सकते हैं? ये साइंस फिक्शन नहीं है। आई मीन इट साउंड्स लाइक इट, बट ये आज की रियलिटी है।
It absolutely is.
और आगे बढ़ने से पहले एक छोटा सा काम, इफ यू वांट टू जॉइन अस ऑन दीज डीप एक्सप्लोरेशंस,
Which you definitely should.
तो हिट दैट सब्सक्राइब बटन राइट नाउ, रिंग द नोटिफिकेशन बेल, और हाँ, लाइक तो बनता ही है।
Exactly. We are talking about rewriting the very code of life. आज का सफर is going to be epic.
आई एम रेडी।
हम शुरू करेंगे जीन थेरेपी से, आगे बढ़ेंगे जेनेटिक स्क्रीनिंग एंड काउंसलिंग की तरफ,
Okay.
फिर जेनेटिक लोड के कॉन्सेप्ट को समझेंगे। उसके बाद हम जेनेटिक्स के लॉ और एथिक्स पर बात करेंगे।
द कंट्रोवर्शियल स्टफ,
ओ या फिर थोड़ा सा प्रोबेबिलिटी एंड स्टैटिस्टिक्स देखेंगे, फिर जीन मैपिंग की दुनिया में चलेंगे।
द रोड मैप ऑफ आवर बॉडीज,
प्रिसाइजली। और सबसे एक्साइटिंग जीन एडिटिंग यानी क्रिस्पर को एक्सप्लोर करेंगे।
द गेम चेंजर।
द गेम चेंजर। और फाइनली हम जीनोमिक लाइब्रेरी के साथ इस डिस्कशन को कंप्लीट करेंगे। सो गेट रेडी फॉर अ वेरी वेरी डीप डाइव।
टॉपिक नेम जीन थेरेपी, ब्रॉड माइक्रो थीम, understanding how we fix faulty genes at the DNA level. So let's start with the big one. What is gene therapy exactly?
देखो, बेसिकली इट्स अ रेवोल्यूशनरी अप्रोच।
Okay,
इंस्टेड ऑफ ट्रीटिंग सिम्टम्स विद ड्रग्स, हम सीधा सोर्स कोड पर जाते हैं, द डीएनए।
right to the root of the problem.
यस, वी ट्राई टू रिप्लेस और फिक्स अ डिफेक्टिव जीन विद अ फंक्शनल वन, सीधा डीएनए लेवल पर।
Okay, इसको थोड़ा रियल बनाते हैं। सोचो 1990 का एक केस, एक 4 साल की लड़की थी जिसे ADA डिफिशिएंसी थी।
इम्यूनोडेफिशिएंसी डिजीज।
हाँ, उसकी बॉडी इन्फेक्शन से लड़ ही नहीं सकती थी। साइंटिस्ट्स ने उसके लिम्फोसाइट्स, जो एक टाइप के व्हाइट ब्लड सेल्स हैं, निकाले।
लैब में।
हाँ, लैब में। उनमें एक नॉर्मल हेल्दी ADA जीन डाला और उन मॉडिफाइड सेल्स को वापस उसकी बॉडी में इंजेक्ट कर दिया।
एंड गेस व्हाट?
द मैजिक हैपेंड। और नए हेल्दी सेल्स उसकी बॉडी में ग्रो करने लगे। दिस वाज अ हिस्टोरिकल मोमेंट, द फर्स्ट एवर अप्रूव्ड जीन थेरेपी।
दैट वाज अ लैंडमार्क केस, अ रियल टर्निंग पॉइंट।
इंट्रोडक्शन, इसकी शुरुआत का क्रेडिट जाता है 1970s में हुई डिस्कवरी को।
ओके, व्हाट डिस्कवरी?
रिस्ट्रिक्शन एंडोन्यूक्लियसेस। इन्हें सोचो, ये ऐसी मॉलिक्यूलर सिजर्स हैं जो डीएनए को स्पेसिफिक जगहों पर काट सकती हैं।
वाओ।
इससे डीएनए को मैनिपुलेट करने का रास्ता खुल गया। समझे? सडनली द आइडिया ऑफ एडिटिंग जीन्स वाजंट जस्ट साइंस फिक्शन एनीमोर।
इट बिकेम अ पॉसिबिलिटी। बैकग्राउंड, पहले फॉर जनरेशंस हम सोचते थे कि हेरिटेबल डिजीजेस को प्रोटीन लेवल पर ट्रीट करेंगे।
सिम्टम्स मैनेज करना बेसिकली।
यस, एग्जैक्टली। बट जीन थेरेपी ने गेम बदल दिया। इट वाज अ पैराडाइम शिफ्ट। अब हम प्रॉब्लम की जड़ यानी जीन तक पहुंच सकते हैं। ऑफ कोर्स इसके साथ मैसिव टेक्निकल और एथिकल कंसर्न्स भी आए, बट द डोर वाज ओपन्ड। The first gene marking experiments in humans happened in 1989, which really paved the way for that 1990 ADA case.
ओके,
Core logic. अब देखो, जीन थेरेपी के 3 मेन टाइप्स हैं, and it's important to know the difference.
ठीक है।
First, gene replacement. इसमें डिफेक्टिव जीन को निकालकर नॉर्मल जीन डाला जाता है। द परफेक्ट कट एंड पेस्ट सोल्यूशन।
साउंड्स आइडियल।
इट डज, लेकिन ये ऑलमोस्ट इम्पॉसिबल माना जाता है इन मोस्ट केसेस।
क्यों?
क्योंकि पूरी बॉडी के ट्रिलियंस ऑफ सेल्स, स्पेशली नॉन डिवाइडिंग सेल्स इन द ब्रेन से एक स्पेसिफिक जीन को प्रिसाइसली कट करके रिप्लेस करना, ये अभी हमारी टेक्नोलॉजी के बियॉन्ड है, याद रखना।
ओके, दैट्स अ ह्यूज चैलेंज।
सेकंड, जीन टारगेटिंग। इसका एम है एक हार्मफुल म्यूटेटेड जीन को डिसरप्ट करना या तोड़ना, ताकि वो अपना काम ना कर सके। सोचो, एक 40 मशीन है जो गड़बड़ कर रही है।
तो आप उसकी पावर सप्लाई काट देते हो।
प्रिसाइसली, ये वही है।
गॉट इट।
एंड थर्ड एंड मोस्ट सक्सेसफुल सो फार इज जीन ऑगमेंटेशन।
ऑगमेंटेशन यानी ऐड करना।
एग्जैक्टली, ये सबसे क्लेवर टेक्निक है। इसमें हम डिफेक्टिव जीन को छेड़ते नहीं, वी लीव इट देयर। उसके साथ वी जस्ट ऐड अ फ्यू कॉपीज ऑफ द नॉर्मल फंक्शनल जीन।
अच्छा,
ये एक्स्ट्रा कॉपीज इतना फंक्शनल प्रोटीन बना देती हैं कि डिफेक्टिव जीन का इफेक्ट नलिफाई हो जाता है। डिजीजेस जैसे ADA डेफिशिएंसी, हाइपरकोलेस्ट्रोलीमिया और सिस्टिक फाइब्रोसिस में ये सक्सेसफुली यूज हो रहा है।
सो इट्स लाइक एडिंग गुड वॉइसेस टू ड्राउन आउट अ बैड वन।
परफेक्ट एनालॉजी। केस स्टडीज, आपने ADA डेफिशिएंसी का केस मेंशन किया। 1990 और 1991 में USA में सक्सेसफुल ट्रायल्स हुए,
हाँ,
जिसके बाद इटली और नेदरलैंड्स ने भी इसको प्रूव किया। इट वाज प्रूफ ऑफ कॉन्सेप्ट।
अ ह्यूज डील।
देन देयर इज कैंसर जीन थेरेपी। ये एक ह्यूज फील्ड है। यहाँ कैंसर पेशेंट से उनके T लिम्फोसाइट्स निकाले जाते हैं, उन्हें जेनेटिकली मॉडिफाई करके उनमें एक जीन डाला जाता है जो ट्यूमर नेक्रोसिस फैक्टर TNF बनाता है।
ओके,
ये मॉडिफाइड सेल्स जो वापस बॉडी में जाते हैं, तो दे एक्ट लाइक सुपर सोल्जर्स।
टारगेटिंग ट्यूमर्स।
यस, टारगेटिंग एंड डिस्ट्रॉइंग ट्यूमर्स। ये बॉडी के इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स को बूस्ट करने का एक ब्रिलियंट तरीका है।
दैट्स इनक्रेडिबल।
और फिर है फेमिलियल हाइपर कोलेस्टेरोलीमिया। इसमें LDL रिसेप्टर जीन में डिफेक्ट होता है, जिससे ब्लड में कोलेस्ट्रॉल लेवल्स डेंजरसली हाई हो जाते हैं।
राइट।
पहले वाटानाबे रैबिट पर सक्सेसफुल ट्रायल्स हुए, फिर 1992 में मिशिगन में एक फीमेल पेशेंट पर
Oh.
उसके लिवर सेल्स निकाले, उन्हें एक रेट्रोवायरस से मॉडिफाई किया और वापस बॉडी में डाल दिया। सो दैट्स कूल ना।
वेरी कूल।
थेरेपी मोडालिटीज। अब थेरेपी या तो पेशेंट पर हो सकती है, सोमैटिक जीन थेरेपी, या फिर एम्ब्रियो पर, जर्म लाइन जीन थेरेपी।
एम्ब्रियो थेरेपी।
हाँ,
ओके,
अभी ह्यूमंस में बैंड है ड्यू टू एथिकल रीजंस,
राइट।
बट माइस और रैबिट्स में यूज हो रही है।
ओके,
और इसके 2 डिलीवरी मेथड्स हैं।
एक्स वीवो।
आउटसाइड द बॉडी, करेक्ट, सेल्स निकाले, लैब में मॉडिफाई किए और वापस डाले। और दूसरा इन वीवो,
इनसाइड द बॉडी।
राइट, जीन को एक वेक्टर के थ्रू डायरेक्ट बॉडी के अंदर सेल्स तक पहुंचाना।
ओके, तो मेथड्स क्या है?
स्टेप्स एंड मेथड्स। पहला स्टेप है जीन आइसोलेशन, जिसमें नॉर्मल जीन को आइसोलेट करते हैं, अक्सर mRNA से कॉपी डीएनए यानी cDNA बनाकर।
ठीक है।
फिर आता है डायरेक्ट डीएनए ट्रांसफर। इसके कई कूल मेथड्स हैं, जैसे माइक्रो मैनिपुलेशन यानी डायरेक्ट इंजेक्शन
डायरेक्ट इंजेक्शन इनटू द सेल।
इनटू द न्यूक्लियस, यस। फिर है जीन गन, जिसमें डीएनए कोटेड गोल्ड पार्टिकल्स को फायर करते हैं,
अ लिटरल गन।
अ टाइनी वन। फिर स्ट्रॉन्ग इलेक्ट्रिक करंट या लाइपोसोम्स, जो लिपिड बबल्स हैं, उनका यूज होता है टू डिलीवर द जीन।
फैसिनेटिंग।
फाइनली द मोस्ट कॉमन मेथड इज यूजिंग वेक्टर्स, बेसिकली वायरसेस को डिलीवरी ट्रक्स की तरह यूज करना।
वायरसेस? दैट साउंड्स डेंजरस।
दे आर मॉडिफाइड टू बी हार्मलेस। दो टाइप्स हैं, रेट्रोवायरसेस, ये आरएनए वायरसेस हैं जो होस्ट डीएनए में परमानेंटली इंटीग्रेट हो जाते हैं।
एडवांटेज?
परमानेंट फिक्स।
प्रॉब्लम?
अगर इंटीग्रेशन गलत जगह हो गया, लाइक नियर अ कैंसर कॉजिंग जीन, तो इट कैन ट्रिगर कैंसर, हाई रिस्क हाई रिवॉर्ड।
उफ, ओके।
दूसरे हैं एडनोवायरसेस, ये डीएनए वायरसेस हैं जो होस्ट डीएनए में इंटीग्रेट नहीं होते।
सो दे आर सेफर।
मच सेफर, नो रिस्क ऑफ इंसर्शनल कैंसर।
बट देयर इज अ कैच।
द कैच इज द इफेक्ट इज टेम्पररी, क्योंकि सेल डिवाइड होने पर वो एक्स्ट्रा जीन डाइल्यूट हो जाता है और बॉडी में स्ट्रॉन्ग इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स भी ट्रिगर करते हैं।
सो इट्स अ ट्रेड ऑफ।
Real world impact. Gene therapy has provided a cure for some rare bubble boy diseases and opened up completely new avenues for treating complex conditions like cancer and heart disease.
Conclusion.
Gene therapy एक revolutionary field है, but it's not a magic bullet. ये one size fits all solution नहीं है।
True.
हर डिजीज के लिए अलग strategy और बहुत सारी challenges हैं। हम अभी भी इसके early stages में, लेकिन potential
Is mind-boggling. Okay, that's a lot to unpack. My first question is, you said gene replacement is almost impossible, while augmentation is successful. ऐसा क्यों है? Why is adding a gene so much easier than swapping one out?
great question. सोचो, your task is to fix a single typole in one book.
Okay,
But that book exists in a library of trillions of books. और आपको किसी और book को disturb नहीं करना है।
that sounds impossible.
That's gene replacement. It requires incredible precision. Gene augmentation is like adding a small note with the correction on the library's front door. No, but everyone who enters gets the right information. It's a much cruder, but for now, much more achievable solution.
That makes sense. Between ex vivo and in vivo, which method gives scientists more control and why?
Ex vivo, definitely. क्योंकि आप cells को body के बाहर एक controlled lab environment में modify कर रहे हो.
Total control.
You can check कि gene ठीक से insert हुआ है या नहीं. You can select only the successfully modified cells and then put them back.
Or in vivo?
In vivo is like shooting an arrow in the dark and hoping it hits the target. You have much less control over which cells get the gene and if it's working.
Okay, the retrovirus versus adenovirus thing is fascinating. अगर retrovirus एक permanent solution offer करता है, तो why would anyone even consider the temporary adenovirus? Safety के लिए इतना बड़ा compromise?
It's all about risk versus benefit. हाँ, इंटीग्रेशन परमानेंट सोल्यूशन दे सकता है, लेकिन उसमें एक स्मॉल बट रियल रिस्क है।
The cancer risk.
यस, अगर वो जीन एक प्रोटोऑन्कोजीन के पास इंटीग्रेट हो गया, तो इट कैन ट्रिगर ल्यूकीमिया। दिस एक्चुअली हैपेंड इन सम अर्ली ट्रायल्स।
Oh wow.
एडनोवायरस इंटीग्रेट नहीं होता, इसलिए वो रिस्क जीरो है, भले ही उसका इफेक्ट टेम्पररी हो और रिपीट ट्रीटमेंट की जरूरत पड़े। फॉर मेनी नॉन लीथल डिजीजेस, सेफ्टी कम्स फर्स्ट, समझे?
The gene gun sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. How exactly does it work? Like a tiny gun?
It's exactly what it sounds like. Basically, you coat microscopic gold or tungsten particles with the DNA you want to deliver.
Gold particles?
Yes, because they are inert. Then you use high-pressure helium gas to shoot these particles at the target cells. The particles penetrate the cell membrane and release the DNA inside.
It's a physical method, not biological.
Exactly. That's its main advantage.
One last thought. Cost effectiveness. For a disease like phenylketonuria, which can be managed with a special diet, is it worth funding expensive gene therapy research? थोड़ा सोच लो.
ये एक valid and very important debate है. Short term में existing treatments like a special diet are obviously cheaper and effective.
Right?
But long term में सोचो. A lifetime of managing a strict diet, special foods, constant monitoring versus a potential one-time cure.
A cure is a cure.
Exactly. Gene therapy could ultimately be cheaper and offer a much better quality of life. So research ज़रूरी है, even for manageable diseases, because managing is not the same as curing.
Now pause and practice saying this part aloud. Gene augmentation adds a functional gene, while gene replacement aims to swap out a defective gene.
In short, gene therapy is a powerful branch of genetics that tries to fix faulty DNA using a variety of clever tools and strategies.
Topic name: Genetic Screening and Counseling. Broad micro-theme: Assessing genetic risk and making informed decisions. Okay, so gene therapy is about fixing the problem. But what about knowing the problem exists in the first place?
Before it even manifests?
Yes, that's where genetic screening and counseling come in. Imagine एक couple है जिनकी family history में muscular dystrophy है. वो family plan करने से पहले एक genetic counselor के पास जाते हैं.
A very smart move.
The counselor doesn't just give advice. They become a detective. They draw a detailed family tree, a pedigree chart,
Right.
or recommend specific DNA tests, and then use that data to tell the couple the exact percentage risk of their child inheriting the disease.
It's about giving them options.
Yes, it helps them make a truly informed decision.
बिल्कुल सही example है. It's all about empowering people with information.
Introduction. इसका main aim है to know your risk. पहले ये बहुत लिमिटेड था, a guessing game based on family history.
Right.
लेकिन अब with modern DNA technology, it's become incredibly precise. It's not about fortune telling, it's about statistical probability based on your actual genetic code.
Data driven.
Background. पहले सिर्फ amniocentesis का option था, where you test fetal cells from the amniotic fluid. But ये pregnancy के 4th month से पहले नहीं हो सकता था.
And by then, making a decision becomes much harder.
Medically and emotionally, yes, very difficult. अब हमारे पास DNA diagnostic probes और PCR जैसी advanced techniques हैं, which can be done much earlier and are much more accurate.
So what are these techniques? Forward logic, screening methodologies. एक है DNA diagnostic probes. ये radioactively labeled single-stranded DNA segments होते हैं जो टेस्ट किए जाने वाले जीन के complementary होते हैं.
So it's like a genetic key.
Perfect. सोचो ये एक genetic key है. अगर सैंपल में वो लॉक यानी म्यूटेटेड जीन है तो प्रोब उसे हाइब्रिडाइज यानी चिपक जाता है. एंड द रेडियोएक्टिव लेबल लाइट्स अप.
Telling us the gene is present.
एग्जैक्टली. दूसरा पावरफुल टूल है PCR, पॉलीमरेज चेन रिएक्शन. दिस इज अ गेम चेंजर.
I've heard of this.
अगर जीन का सैंपल बहुत छोटा है लाइक अ सिंगल सेल तो PCR यूज करके उसकी मिलियंस ऑफ कॉपीज बनाई जाती हैं इन अ फ्यू आवर्स.
It's gene amplification.
Yes, it's like using a photocopier on a single sentence until you have a whole book of it, making it super easy to detect.
Okay, and how is the risk calculated?
Risk calculation. For simple systems, monogenic disorders जैसे cystic fibrosis, Mendelian patterns यूज होते हैं. लेकिन एक good counselor Bayesian principle यूज करके probability को refine कर सकता है.
Bayesian principle.
It's a way of updating probability with new information. For example, in an X-linked muscular dystrophy case, a woman with an affected brother has a 1 of 12 prior probability of being a carrier.
50-50.
Right. But if she has 2 normal sons, this is new information. Using Bayesian calculation, her risk drops from 1 of 12 to 1 of 5.
Wow, that's a big drop.
This is pure math, making the prediction more accurate.
And for more complex diseases?
For complex systems, polygenic disorders, जैसे coronary heart disease या diabetes, risk calculate करना बहुत मुश्किल है.
क्योंकि multiple genes and environment are involved.
Correct. यहाँ काउंसलर स्पेसिफिक जीन्स का टेस्ट करने के बजाय एनवायरमेंटल रिस्क फैक्टर्स कम करने की एडवाइस दे सकता है, लाइक डाइट एंड एक्सरसाइज.
Makes sense.
Real world impact. Genetic screening has revolutionized family planning for those with genetic risks. Early diagnosis of conditions like PKU in newborns can prevent severe disability. It has given people more control over their genetic destiny.
But it's not all positive, right? There must be ethical issues.
Oh, it's an ethical minefield. Conclusion, the ethical minefield. This is a huge but. इससे massive ethical problems भी पैदा हुई हैं.
जैसे?
1. Mistaken paternity. Genetic tests are brutally honest. Sometimes they reveal that the husband is not the biological father. What should a counselor do?
That's a very difficult situation.
2. Confidentiality versus duty to warn. अगर किसी पेशेंट में सीरियस ट्रीटेबल जेनेटिक एलिमेंट मिलता है जो उसके सिबलिंग्स को भी अफेक्ट कर सकता है तो काउंसलर क्या करें?
Patient privacy versus saving a relative's life.
एग्जैक्टली.
3. Genetic discrimination. This is the big one. अगर आपकी genetic defect की information लीक हो जाए तो insurance companies could refuse you coverage और employers could refuse you a job.
Your own DNA could be used against you.
Yes. 4. Interpretation difficulties. कई बार टेस्ट में ऐसी रेयर म्यूटेशंस मिलती हैं जिनके बारे में पता ही नहीं कि वो डिजीज कॉज करती हैं या हार्मलेस वेरिएशंस हैं.
A neutral polymorphism.
Correct. So you get a result but no clear answer.
That must be frustrating. And 5. Late developing diseases. Huntington's disease जैसी बीमारियों के लिए काउंसलिंग करना आसान नहीं. ये लाइफ में 40-50 साल की उम्र में डेवलप होती है and it's fatal and incurable. Knowing at age 20 that you will get this disease can be a devastating psychological burden.
I have so many questions here. Let's start with PCR. You called it gene amplification. Can you explain that in a simpler way? What's its main role in screening?
Of course. Imagine you have a single grain of sand on a massive beach and you need to find it.
Impossible.
Right. Now what if you had a magic machine that could turn that one grain of sand into a giant boulder?
Okay, then I could find it.
That's PCR. It takes a tiny undetectable amount of specific DNA and amplifies it into millions of copies, making it a giant, easily detectable signal. It allows us to find that genetic needle in a haystack.
The Bayesian principle sounds complex. Is it just a better guess or is it actual science? How does it make the risk calculation better?
It's not a guess at all, it's conditional probability. It's a mathematical way to update your beliefs based on new evidence.
So, evidence-based updates.
Precisely. The initial 12 probability for the woman was based on one piece of information, her brother. The fact that she had 2 healthy sons is new, strong evidence. Bayesian maths provides a formal way to combine the old and new information to arrive at a more precise, updated probability.
It's smarter math, not a better guess.
You got it.
Genetic discrimination sounds terrifying. Can you give me a real-world example of how that could play out?
Absolutely. Imagine a young woman gets tested and finds out she carries the BRCA gene mutation, which significantly increases her risk of breast cancer.
Okay.
If this information somehow gets to her insurance company, they might see her as a future high-cost client. They could legally, in some places, raise her premiums to an unaffordable level.
Or just deny her coverage.
Or deny her life or health insurance altogether. Her genetic predisposition becomes a pre-existing condition even before she's sick.
What about the neutral polymorphism versus a disease-causing mutation? How do scientists even tell the difference?
यही तो the biggest challenge है. कई बार they can't be sure. The first step is to check large population databases.
Okay.
If this mutation is common in healthy people, it's likely harmless. If it's only ever seen in people with the disease, it's likely harmful.
But what if it's brand new?
For brand new, rare mutations, it can take years of research, lab studies, family studies to figure it out. And sometimes the answer remains a variant of unknown significance. It's a gray area.
And for late developing diseases like Huntington's, what is the psychological impact on a person who decides to get tested at a young age?
It's profound. Imagine you're 20 years old, planning your life, career, marriage, and you get a test result that's essentially a death sentence, scheduled for 20, 30 years in the future.
That's unimaginable.
Some people fall into depression, some engage in risky behavior, others feel a sense of liberation and live life to the fullest. But it changes everything.
Every decision is affected.
Every single decision, whether to have kids, what career to pursue, is viewed through the lens of that future disease. It's an unbelievably heavy burden to carry.
Now, pause and practice saying this part aloud. Genetic screening uses tools like PCR and DNA probes to calculate risk, but it comes with major ethical challenges, like genetic discrimination.
In short, genetic screening helps us understand risk, but finding answers to the ethical questions it raises is just as important as the science itself.
Topic name, genetic load. Broad micro theme, the hidden cost of harmful mutations in a population. Okay, now for a more philosophical, big picture concept. Genetic load.
Yes, this one's a mind-bender.
Basically, it's the collection of harmful, usually recessive mutations present in a population's gene pool. It's a measure of how far a population is from its perfect genetic constitution.
That's a good way to put it.
Let's use an analogy. सोचो एक क्रिकेट टीम है. उसका optimum genotype मतलब सारे 11 players are in perfect health and peak form.
The dream team.
Exactly. लेकिन reality में कुछ players के पास minor injuries है या वो out of form है. ये out of form और injured players टीम का genetic load है.
Right.
They lower the team's overall performance or fitness just a little bit. समझे?
That's a brilliant analogy. It perfectly captures the essence.
Introduction. ये कॉन्सेप्ट हेल्डन जैसे ग्रेट पॉपुलेशन जेनेटिस्ट्स ने 1930s-50s में डेवलप किया था. It has a mathematical formula. L is equal to 1 minus W.
Okay, what do the letters stand for?
W is the average fitness of the population, and 1 represents the fitness of the optimum genotype, that perfect cricket team.
So the load is the difference between the best possible and the actual average.
Precisely. Background, evolving perspectives. Historically, genetic load को एक dreaded monster की तरह देखा जाता था.
A monster? Yes, it was seen as a burden, a collection of genetic junk that weighs a population down and leads to genetic death, the elimination of individuals with less fit genes.
Sounds pretty bad.
But the modern view is, and this is fascinating, just the reverse. अब इसे इतना बुरा नहीं माना जाता. It's not a monster. It might even be a necessary feature.
Wait, how can a load of bad genes be necessary?
चलो देखते हैं. Core logic. पहला reason है adaptation. Environment static नहीं है. It's always changing.
Right.
इसलिए optimum genotype भी हमेशा same नहीं रहता. What is perfect today might be terrible tomorrow.
True.
एक पॉपुलेशन में जितनी ज्यादा जेनेटिक वेरिएशन यानी जेनेटिक लोड होगी उतना ही ज्यादा चांसेस हैं कि बदलते एनवायरनमेंट में कुछ फॉर्मली डेलिटेरियस जीन्स सडनली एडवांटेजेस बन जाएं.
Like the out of form bowler in your analogy.
एग्जैक्टली अचानक क्रिकेट पिच स्विंग करने लगे तो वो आउट ऑफ फॉर्म बॉलर जो अजीब एक्शन से बॉल डालता है सडनली टीम का स्टार बन सकता है.
I see.
इन दिस व्यू द एब्सेंस ऑफ जेनेटिक लोड कुड बी मोर डेट्रीमेंटल. अ परफेक्टली यूनिफॉर्म पॉपुलेशन इज ब्रिटल. It can be wiped out by a single change.
Variation is strength.
That's the core idea. दूसरा reason है population fitness. For any species to survive, its population size needs to be in balance with the environment's carrying capacity.
Overcrowding is bad.
It leads to disaster. इसके लिए self-thinning जरूरी है. Genetic load by weeding out weaker individuals through natural selection helps in this self-thinning process and prevents overcrowding.
That's a very cold, logical way of looking at it.
It is. इस व्यू से म्यूटेंट alleles भले ही इंडिविजुअल की फिटनेस कम करें लेकिन वो पॉपुलेशन की ओवरऑल लॉन्ग टर्म फिटनेस बढ़ा सकते हैं by keeping numbers in check. बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग कॉन्सेप्ट है ना?
It's counterintuitive.
वेरी.
Real world impact.
ये कॉन्सेप्ट हमें एवोल्यूशन को बेहतर समझने में हेल्प करता है. It tells us that genetic diversity, even if it includes some harmful genes, is a long-term survival strategy.
Nature plays the long game.
Conclusion. So genetic load is a classic double-edged sword. On one hand, it's the reason for genetic death and individual suffering.
And on the other hand,
On the other hand, it's the raw material for adaptation and the key to a population's long-term survival and resilience.
तो आसान शब्दों में, is genetic load good or bad? I'm still a bit confused.
It's neither. It's a trade-off. It's bad for the individual who inherits a harmful combination of genes, no question.
Of course.
But it's essential for the survival of the population as a whole. Evolution doesn't care about individuals. It cares about the continuation of the species.
So from nature's perspective, it's a feature, not a bug.
Beautifully put. Yes, a feature, not a bug.
You said absence of genetic load could be more detrimental. Can you expand on that? What would a world without genetic load look like?
It would look like a population of clones. Imagine a species of plant that is genetically identical and perfectly adapted to a certain temperature.
Sounds efficient?
It is, until it's not. If a sudden climate change brings a new disease or a heat wave, every single plant would be wiped out.
Because there's no variation.
Exactly. There would be no individuals who might have a random, formerly useless gene that suddenly makes them heat resistant. Variation, which is what genetic load provides, is the ultimate insurance policy.
The idea of self-thinning sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it? Like something out of a dystopian novel.
It does, from our individual-centric human perspective. Nature, however, operates on the level of populations and ecosystems.
It's a different scale.
In that context, harshness and efficiency often go hand in hand. It's a natural mechanism to manage resources and ensure the long-term viability of a species. It's not malicious, it's just a mathematical and ecological reality.
How does the mutation rate in a population affect its genetic load?
That's a direct relationship. Simple, eh? A higher mutation rate means more new mutations are being introduced into the gene pool per generation.
So, higher mutation rate.
Equals higher genetic load. A lower mutation rate means a lower genetic load. Mutation is the ultimate source of all this variation.
And what about the selection coefficient? What role does that play?
The selection coefficient measures how strongly natural selection acts against a particular gene. If a mutation is highly detrimental, it will have a strong selection coefficient.
And be removed from the population quickly.
Exactly. Individuals carry it will be quickly removed. If it's only mildly harmful, the selection is weaker.
So it affects how fast bad genes are removed?
Yes. Interestingly, the math shows that the overall load depends more on the mutation rate than on how strong the selection is. Selection just affects the turnover rate.
Now, pause and practice this idea. Genetic load seems bad for an individual, but it provides the necessary variation for a population to adapt and survive in a changing environment.
In short, genetic load is the measure of a population's genetic imperfection, which is a short-term cost for the long-term gain of evolutionary adaptability.
Topic name: Genetics, Law and Ethics. Broad micro-theme: the debate over owning life. Patents, property and principles. अब आते हैं एक बहुत ही controversial topic पर.
The big one.
जैसे जैसे we get better at manipulating genetics, the need for laws and ethical guidelines is exploding. और इसका सबसे बड़ा सवाल है, can you patent a gene? Can you own a piece of the human blueprint?
A fundamental question.
The most famous case is about the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes. ये breast cancer से strongly linked है. A US company, Myriad Genetics, discovered their location and function and took out patents on them.
Yes, this case changed everything.
इसका मतलब था कि इन genes से related कोई भी diagnostic test सिर्फ वही कंपनी कर सकती थी. They priced the test kit at $2,500.
$2,500?
जबकि एक French कंपनी ने वैसा ही टेस्ट $680 में डेवलप कर लिया था. सोचो, this patent made testing inaccessible for thousands of women just for profit.
Yes, the BRCA case is the classic example of this conflict between innovation, profit, and public health.
Introduction.
यहाँ सबसे बड़ा ethical concern है the rights of the people to be individuals. हमारी genetic information पर किसका हक है?
Right.
Does a company have the right to own a part of your body's code just because they were the first to identify it? This is a huge philosophical question.
It really is.
Background. Patents 101. A patent grants the inventor exclusive rights for a set period, like 17 years in the USA, to make, use, and sell their invention.
The idea is to encourage innovation.
Exactly. To incentivize innovation by allowing inventors to profit from their hard work. इसके लिए invention को novel, useful, and non-obvious होना चाहिए.
So how did this apply to life forms?
Core logic. Patenting life forms in genes. The slippery slope started with a patent on an oil-eating bacterium, Pseudomonas.
An oil-eating bacteria.
Yes. The court ruled that it was a manufactured organism, not a product of nature. उसके बाद genetically engineered E. coli, herbicide-resistant cotton, और oncomouse, a mouse specifically engineered to get cancer for research, भी patent हुए.
An oncomouse?
Wow. Human genes को patent करना सबसे controversial है. The argument for is that discovering a gene's function and isolating it requires huge investment. Patents provide that incentive.
And the argument against?
The argument against is that this is patenting of nature. You can't patent gold just because you found a new way to mine it. Genes are discoveries, not inventions.
So how did they get around that?
Procedurally, companies argued that they were patenting the gene in its isolated or purified form, which is different from how it exists in the body. A legal loophole, basically. Debate around gene fragments, SNPs, it got even more controversial. Companies started patenting short gene fragments, ESTs. भले ही उनका function पता ना हो.
That's like patenting a random paragraph from a book without knowing what the book is about.
Perfect analogy, yes. Similarly, consortiums were formed to patent common genetic variations, SNPs.
So let's list the pros and cons clearly.
Advantages versus disadvantages of patenting. Advantages. It rewards inventors, stimulates research by promising a return on investment, and reduces secrecy because patents require public disclosure.
Okay.
Disadvantages. Patent filings can actually reduce public knowledge by locking it up. Private companies monopolize test markets and drive up prices.
Like with Myriad.
Yes, patent holders can essentially own a part of nature, and patent stacking can cripple research by raising costs.
So what happened in the BRCA case?
Case studies. आपने BRCA genes का जिक्र किया. In a landmark 2013 decision, the US Supreme Court invalidated Myriad Genetics patents on the genes themselves, stating that genes are products of nature.
A huge victory for the against camp.
It was. However, they allowed patents on cDNA, the synthetic copy of the gene, which was a partial victory for both sides.
Interesting. What about the Indian examples?
Then there is the Indian Gene Bank. International companies tried to patent the use of turmeric for healing and the properties of Kalmade and basmati rice. The Indian government successfully challenged these patents by proving prior art.
Prior art.
That this was traditional knowledge known in India for centuries.
So not a new invention.
Exactly. But patents can also have huge social utility. The company Genentech patented the Human Tissue Plasminogen Activator, TPA.
What's that?
It's used to make a life-saving drug for heart attack victims. The argument is that if patent protection ना होती, तो कंपनी इतना इन्वेस्ट ही नहीं करती और ये ड्रग मार्केट में अवेलेबल ही ना होता.
So it's not all bad.
Real-world impact. Gene patenting directly affects research, healthcare costs, or the free exchange of scientific knowledge. It's a constant tug of war between incentivizing innovation and ensuring accessibility for everyone. Conclusion. Genetic law and ethics are constantly trying to catch up with the science. टेक्नोलॉजी हमेशा लॉ से आगे चलती है और सोसाइटी को एक डिफिकल्ट बैलेंस ढूंढना पड़ रहा है बिटवीन कमर्शियल इंटरेस्ट्स एंड फंडामेंटल ह्यूमन राइट्स.
That phrase, patenting of nature, is very powerful. What does it actually mean? Genes तो हमने बनाए नहीं.
एग्जैक्टली यही तो मेन आर्ग्यूमेंट है. ओपोनेंट्स कहते हैं कि जीन्स आर अ पार्ट ऑफ नेचर, जस्ट लाइक अ माउंटेन, अ रिवर और द एयर वी ब्रीथ.
You can't patent a mountain.
You can discover them, you can study them, but you can't claim an invention and own them. The Myriad case was about this very principle. The Supreme Court agreed, saying that simply isolating something from nature does not make it an invention.
But the TPA gene case study seems to support patenting. So is patenting always a bad thing?
बिल्कुल नहीं. It's not black and white. The TPA case shows that patents can be a crucial driver for R&D, especially in high-risk, high-cost fields like drug development.
Right.
A company might spend $1 billion to bring one drug to market. Without a period of exclusivity to recoup that cost, they just wouldn't do it.
So balance is needed.
Yes. The problem arises when patents are used not just to recoup costs, but to create an abusive monopoly and block access, as was argued in the Myriad case. Balance zaruri hai.
How exactly did the Indian government challenge the turmeric or basmati patents? What was their basis?
Their basis was prior art or traditional knowledge. They went back to ancient Sanskrit texts and traditional medicine records.
Wow.
And proved that the healing properties of turmeric and the unique qualities of basmati rice were known and documented in India for centuries.
So not novel.
Exactly. Since a patent requires the invention to be novel or new, this evidence proved that the patent claims were not new at all. It was a major victory for protecting traditional knowledge.
What is patent stacking? And how does it raise costs for researchers?
Imagine you want to research a single gene, but company A owns a patent on a small fragment of it. Company B owns a patent on a diagnostic test using it, and company C owns a patent on its synthetic copy.
A web of patents.
ये एक patent stacking है. Now, if you want to do comprehensive research, you have to negotiate and pay royalties to all three companies.
Which makes it too expensive.
It can make research so expensive and complicated that scientists just give up and work on something else. It stifles innovation.
The oncomouse patent is ethically very tricky. We are creating an animal that is specifically designed to suffer and get disease. How is that justified?
ये एक बहुत complex ethical सवाल है. On one hand, the oncomouse has been an invaluable tool in cancer research and has helped develop countless therapies that have saved human lives.
The utilitarian argument.
Yes, from a utilitarian perspective, the benefit is huge. On the other hand, it raises deep questions about animal rights and the instrumentalization of life, treating a living being purely as a tool.
There's no easy answer.
यहाँ कोई आसान जवाब नहीं है, and it's a debate that continues today.
Now pause and practice saying this. The core ethical debate in gene patenting is balancing the incentive for innovation against the risk of creating monopolies and limiting public access to genetic information.
In short, genetic law tries to manage the complex and often conflicting relationship between scientific discovery, commercial interests, and fundamental human rights.
Topic name: Probability and Statistics in Genetics. Broad micro theme: the math that powers genetic predictions. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. हमने risk calculation की बात की, but let's dive into the math behind it. Probability and statistics.
The backbone of genetics, really. Without it, genetics would just be observation, not a predictive science.
So how does it work? Let's start with the basics. The Punnett square.
The Punnett square is the classic tool. It's a simple grid that helps us visualize and predict the outcome of a genetic cross.
Like for eye color?
Exactly. Imagine one parent has one dominant allele for brown eyes, B, and one recessive for blue, B, so they are BB.
The other parent is the same.
Both BB.
Yes.
The Punnett square shows you all possible combinations for their child. BB, 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 and BB.
So a 1 in 4 chance of having blue eyes,
Yeah.
BB.
Precisely. It gives you the probability. A 25% chance of homozygous dominant, BB, 50% chance of heterozygous, BB, and 25% chance of homozygous recessive, BB.
So simple, yet so powerful.
Introduction. This is where Gregor Mendel's work was so revolutionary. He didn't just observe pea plants, he counted them. He brought mathematics into biology.
He was a monk, right?
Yes, an Augustinian friar. His work laid the foundation for everything we're discussing. Background. For a long time, people believed in blending inheritance, that traits from parents just mix together like paint.
But that doesn't explain how a trait can skip a generation and reappear.
Exactly. Mendel showed that inheritance is particulate. Genes are passed down as discrete units. Probability helps us track those units. Core logic. Beyond the Punnett square, there are two fundamental rules of probability.
Okay.
The product rule. It states that the probability of two independent events occurring together is the product of their individual probabilities.
Can you give an example?
Sure. What's the probability of flipping a coin and getting heads?
Half.
And getting heads again on a second flip?
Also half.
Right. So the probability of getting two heads in a row is 1/2 times 1/2, which is 1/4. In genetics, we use this to calculate the probability of inheriting a specific combination of alleles.
I see. And the other rule?
The sum rule. This is used for mutually exclusive events. It states that the probability that any one of several mutually exclusive events will occur is the sum of their individual probabilities.
Example?
Let's go back to the BB cross. The probability of having a child with brown eyes is the probability of BB plus the probability of BB.
So 1/4 plus 1/2, which is 3/4.
Exactly. Because both BB and BB result in brown eyes, and a child can't be both at the same time. You add their probabilities.
Real-world impact. These simple rules are used every day in genetic counseling to predict the risk for monogenic diseases like sickle cell anemia or cystic fibrosis.
They're also the foundation for more complex statistical genetics used to find genes associated with diseases like diabetes or heart disease in large populations. Conclusion. So, from a simple Punnett square to complex statistical models, probability is the language we use to understand and predict heredity. It turns genetics from a mystery into a science of probabilities.
Okay, so the product rule is for AND events and the sum rule is for OR events. Is that a good way to remember it?
That's a perfect way to remember it. Product rule for event A and event B happening. Sum rule for event A or event B happening.
That helps a lot.
It's the key distinction.
How accurate are these predictions? Can a couple rely 100% on these probabilities?
That's a very important question. The math is 100% accurate for the model.
But reality is messy.
Exactly. The probability is for each individual event. A 1 in 4 chance doesn't mean that if a couple has 4 kids, one will have the recessive trait.
Right, they could have 4 with it or none.
Correct. It's like flipping a coin. Each flip is independent. So it's a powerful predictive tool for risk, but it's not a guarantee for any single outcome.
You mentioned Mendel. Did he actually know about genes and DNA?
No, not at all. That's what's so incredible. He was working in the 1860s. DNA structure wasn't discovered until the 1950s.
So he was just observing the patterns?
He was observing the patterns and inferring the rules. He called them heritable factors. He had no idea what they were made of, but he figured out the mathematical rules they followed. He was decades ahead of his time.
How does this math apply to something complex like height, where it's not just one gene?
Great question. That's where it moves from simple probability to complex statistics. Height is a polygenic trait, influenced by hundreds of genes, plus environmental factors like nutrition.
So no simple Punnett square for that.
No. Instead, statisticians use models like Genome-Wide Association Studies, GWAS, to analyze the DNA of thousands of people and find which genetic variations are statistically associated with being taller or shorter. It's probability on a massive scale.
One more thing. What's the difference between probability and statistics in this context?
A simple way to think about it is, probability is forward-looking. If we know the parents' genes, we can predict the probability of outcomes in the children.
Okay.
Statistics is often backward-looking. We look at the outcome, a population with a certain disease, and work backward to figure out which genes are statistically likely to be the cause.
Predicting versus inferring.
Exactly. Both are crucial for genetics.
Okay, let's practice this. Now pause and practice saying this part aloud. The product rule is for AND events, like inheriting this allele and that allele. The sum rule is for OR events, like having this genotype or that genotype.
In short, probability and statistics provide the mathematical framework that makes genetics a predictive science, allowing us to calculate the odds of inheritance.
Topic name: gene mapping. Broad micro theme: creating the Google Maps for our chromosomes. So we know genes exist, and we know how they are inherited. But where are they? That brings us to gene mapping.
The geography of the genome?
I like that. Creating the Google Maps for our chromosomes. So what is it?
Gene mapping is basically figuring out the specific location or locus of a gene on a chromosome and its distance from other genes.
The address of a gene.
A very precise address. Imagine a long highway. Gene mapping tells you which highway, chromosome, a town, gene is on, and at which mile marker. Introduction. Early on, scientists knew genes were on chromosomes, but they seemed to be in a random order. The idea that you could create a linear map seemed far-fetched.
But then what changed?
The work of Alfred Sturtevant, a student of Thomas Hunt Morgan, in the early 1910s. He was working with fruit flies.
The famous fruit flies.
Yes, he realized that the frequency of recombination between two genes could be used to measure the distance between them.
Recombination, that's crossing over during meiosis, right?
Precisely. He reasoned that the farther apart two genes are on a chromosome, the more likely a crossover event will happen between them.
That's brilliant.
It was a monumental insight. He used this data to create the first ever genetic map. Background. For decades, this was the only way to map genes, by looking at inheritance patterns and recombination frequencies. This is called a linkage map. The distances are measured in centimorgans, named after his professor.
It's a relative map, not an absolute one.
Exactly. It tells you the order and relative distance, but not the exact physical distance in base pairs.
Core logic. Then, with the advent of molecular biology, we developed physical maps. These are the Google Street View level of detail.
How are those made?
They use techniques like sequencing to determine the exact number of base pairs between genes. The ultimate physical map is the complete DNA sequence of a chromosome.
The Human Genome Project. That was the pinnacle of physical mapping. From 2003, we had the nearly complete sequence of the human genome. We now have the address of almost every gene.
So we have both types of maps.
Yes, We use linkage maps to track how traits are inherited together, and physical maps to find the actual DNA sequence of a gene once we've narrowed down its location.
Real-world impact. Gene mapping is crucial for identifying disease-causing genes. If scientists see a particular genetic marker is always inherited with a disease in a family,
They know the gene must be located very close to that marker on the chromosome.
it helps them narrow down the search.
Massively. This is how the genes for cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease were found. Conclusion. Gene mapping has taken us from a blurry, abstract idea of genes on a string to a high-resolution, searchable map of our entire genetic code. It's the essential foundation for diagnostics, gene therapy, and understanding human evolution.
So Sturtevant's idea was that recombination frequency equals distance. How reliable is that?
It's a very good approximation, especially for genes that are relatively close. But it's not perfect,
Why not?
because crossover events are not completely random. Some areas of the chromosome are hotspots for recombination, and others are cold spots. So a high recombination frequency might mean a large physical distance, or it could just be a recombination hotspot.
So the map can have some distortions.
Exactly. That's why physical maps, based on actual sequencing, are the gold standard for accuracy.
What's a centimorgan? Is it a real unit of length?
No, it's not a physical distance like a centimeter. 1 centimorgan, cm, is defined as the genetic distance that corresponds to a 1% recombination frequency.
So it's a unit of probability.
Precisely. It's a measure of how likely two genes are to be separated by a crossover event. In humans, on average, 1 centimorgan corresponds to about 1 million base pairs, but this can vary in Gs. The map part is the annotation that says this stretch of letters from position X to position Y on chromosome 7 is the CFTR gene. You can access it on a computer and search for any gene you want.
So it's a searchable database?
A searchable, annotated reference for all of humanity.
If two genes are on different chromosomes, can they be linked?
No. By definition, linkage only applies to genes that are on the same chromosome.
So they would assort independently.
Exactly. They would follow Mendel's law of independent assortment. Recombination frequency between them would be 50%, which is the same as if they were on different chromosomes. A 50% recombination frequency means genes are unlinked.
Has mapping the human genome solved all our problems? Do we now know what every gene does?
Not even close. That's a common misconception. We have the map, the sequence, but it's like having a book in a language you only partially understand.
We have the words, but not all the meanings.
Exactly. We've identified most of the genes, but for many of them, we still have very little idea what their function is. Mapping the genome was just the end of the beginning. Figuring out what it all means is the work of this century.
Let's practice. Now pause and practice saying this part aloud. A linkage map shows the relative position of genes based on recombination frequency, while a physical map shows their exact position in base pairs.
In short, gene mapping provides the fundamental roadmap of our chromosomes, telling us where genes are located, which is the first step to understanding what they do.
Topic name, Gene Editing, CRISPR CAD System, ZFN, TLEN. Broad micro theme, the revolutionary tool that allows us to rewrite the code of life. Okay, this is the one I've been waiting for. CRISPR. It feels like it's everywhere.
It is. It's probably the biggest biological breakthrough of the 21st century so far.
So gene editing, this is different from the gene therapy we talked about earlier.
It's a specific, incredibly precise tool for gene therapy. The earlier methods were like using a sledgehammer. CRISPR is like a molecular scalpel.
So what is it? Let's use an analogy. How about a search and replace function for DNA?
That's the perfect analogy. CRISPR-Cas9 is a system that can find a very specific sequence of DNA in the genome, make a precise cut, and then allow us to either delete that piece or replace it with a new one. Introduction. CRISPR was not invented by humans. It was discovered. It's an ancient immune system found in bacteria.
An immune system?
Yes. Bacteria use it to fight off viruses. They store little snippets of viral DNA in their own genome in these CRISPR arrays.
Like a most wanted list.
Exactly. If that virus attacks again, the bacteria produces an RNA copy of that snippet, which then guides a protein called Cas9 to the invading viral DNA and chops it up.
Wow.
Scientists like Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier realized in 2012 that this system could be reprogrammed. You could give it any guide RNA, and it would cut any DNA sequence you wanted.
In any organism.
In any organism. That was the revolution.
Background. Before CRISPR, gene editing was possible, but extremely difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. There were tools like ZFNS and TALENs.
What are those?
They are also like molecular scissors, but you have to engineer a whole new complex protein for every single DNA sequence you want to target. It could take months or years and cost a fortune.
And CRISPR?
With CRISPR, you just have to change the small guide RNA, which is cheap and takes days. It made gene editing accessible to almost any lab in the world.
Core logic.
The CRISPR-Cas9 system has two key components.
Okay.
First, the guide RNA, gRNA. This is the search part. It's a short sequence of RNA that you design to match the target DNA sequence you want to edit.
The GPS coordinates.
Perfect. Second is the Cas9 protein. This is an enzyme, the scissors part. The guide RNA leads the Cas9 protein to the exact spot in the genome, and then Cas9 makes a double-stranded cut in the DNA.
And once it's cut,
The cell's natural DNA repair machinery takes over. It can either stick the ends back together, which often creates a small error that disables the gene.
the delete function.
Yes. Or, if you provide a new piece of DNA as a template, the cell can use that to repair the cut, effectively pasting in your new sequence.
The replace function.
Exactly.
Search, cut, and then either delete or replace.
Real-world impact. The impact is already massive. In research, it has accelerated the study of genes 1,000-fold. In medicine, clinical trials are underway to use CRISPR to treat diseases like sickle cell anemia, beta thalassemia, and even some types of cancer.
In agriculture, it's being used to create crops that are more nutritious or resistant to disease.
Conclusion. CRISPR is a game changer. It gives humanity an unprecedented level of control over the genetic code. But with this immense power comes immense ethical responsibility. The possibility of designer babies and editing the human germline is no longer science fiction, and it's a conversation society needs to have right now.
So CRISPR is cheaper, faster, and easier than older methods like ZFNs.
Is it also more accurate? Generally, yes. It's very accurate.
Yes.
But it's not perfect. The biggest concern is off-target effects.
Meaning?
Meaning the guide RNA might accidentally bind to a spot in the genome that's very similar but not identical to the target sequence. This could cause the Cas9 enzyme to cut in the wrong place.
Which could be disastrous.
It could be. It could disable an important gene or even trigger cancer. Scientists are working very hard on developing higher fidelity Cas9 proteins and better guide RNA designs to minimize this risk.
You mentioned designer babies. How close are we to that actually being a reality?
We are technically there. In 2018, a scientist in China, He Jiankui, announced he had created the world's first gene-edited babies resistant to HIV.
I remember that.
Yeah.
It caused a huge uproar.
A massive global outcry. He was condemned by the scientific community because the procedure was unsafe, unethical, and medically unnecessary. He was also sentenced to prison.
So the technology exists?
The technology exists, but there is a global consensus for now that using it to edit the human germline, making heritable changes to our species, is a line we should not cross. But the debate is far from over.
Can CRISPR be used to treat a disease like Alzheimer's?
It's much more complicated. Alzheimer's is a complex, polygenic disease with strong environmental factors. There isn't a single Alzheimer's gene you can just fix.
Right.
However, CRISPR is being used in research to create better models of the disease in lab animals and cell cultures to understand it better. For single gene disorders like Huntington's, the potential for a direct cure is much higher, although delivering the CRISPR system to the brain is a major hurdle.
If bacteria use CRISPR as an immune system, have viruses evolved ways to fight back?
Absolutely, it's a constant evolutionary arms race. Some viruses have evolved proteins called anti-CRSPers.
Anti-CRSPers.
Yes, these proteins can block the Cas9 enzyme from cutting, effectively disabling the bacterial immune system.
That's fascinating.
Scientists are now studying these anti-CRSPers to see if they can be used as an off switch for gene therapy, giving us even more control over the editing process.
CRISPR seems so powerful. Are there any other uses outside of medicine and agriculture?
Oh, many. Scientists are exploring using it for gene drives.
Gene drives.
A gene drive is a genetic engineering tool that can spread a particular suite of genes throughout a population. For example, you could release mosquitoes with a gene drive that makes them sterile, potentially wiping out malaria-carrying mosquito populations.
That sounds amazing, but also terrifying.
It is. It has the potential to do incredible good, but also the potential to cause unforeseen ecological damage. It's another area where the ethics are incredibly complex.
Okay, time to practice. Now pause and practice saying this part aloud. CRISPR-Cas9 uses a guide RNA to find a specific DNA sequence, and the Cas9 enzyme to make a precise cut, enabling gene editing.
In short, CRISPR is a revolutionary gene editing tool that offers unprecedented precision and ease of use, but also brings profound ethical challenges about the future of the human species.
Topic name: Genomic Library. Broad micro theme: storing an organism's entire genetic blueprint.
Okay, last topic. We've talked about finding genes, editing genes, but how do we store all this genetic information for study? That brings us to the genomic library.
Yes, the archive of life.
So it's not a building with books, obviously. What is it? A genomic library is a collection of the total genomic DNA from a single organism. The DNA is stored in a population of identical vectors, like plasmids or viruses, each carrying a different fragment of the DNA.
So it's like you've taken an entire encyclopedia, ripped it into individual pages, and put each page into a separate folder.
That's a perfect analogy. The entire genome is broken up into manageable fragments, and the library is the collection of all those fragments, which together represent the entire genome. Introduction. Before we could sequence entire genomes, we needed a way to isolate and study individual genes. The concept of a genomic library, developed in the late 1970s, was the solution.
So it's a foundational technology.
Absolutely. It allowed researchers to pick out a single page, a single gene, from the entire encyclopedia to study it in detail. Background. To make a library, you first have to extract the entire DNA from an organism's cells. Then you use a restriction enzyme.
The molecular scissors again.
Yes, but you use it in a way that it doesn't cut at every possible site. You want to create large overlapping fragments. Then you insert these fragments into vectors.
Like plasmids in bacteria.
Right. Plasmids or other vectors, like BSEs, bacterial artificial chromosomes, for larger fragments. Each bacterium then takes up one plasmid with one fragment. When you grow the bacteria, you get billions of copies of that one fragment. The whole collection of bacteria is your library. Core logic. Now there are two main types of libraries. What we've just described is a genomic DNA library. It contains everything: genes, introns, regulatory sequences, junk DNA, the whole lot.
The complete encyclopedia.
Yes, but sometimes a researcher is only interested in the genes that are actually being expressed, the ones making proteins.
Right.
For that, they build a cDNA library. C stands for complementary. They extract the messenger RNA from a cell.
Which is only made from expressed genes.
Exactly. Then they use an enzyme called reverse transcriptase to make a DNA copy of that mRNA. That's cDNA.
So a cDNA library is like the Cliff's Notes version.
It's a perfect way to put it. It only contains the coding sequences of the genes that were active in that specific cell type at that specific time. No introns, no junk DNA. It's much smaller and more focused.
Real-world impact. Genomic libraries were the essential resource used for the Human Genome Project. Scientists around the world each took different parts of the library to sequence. They are still vital for studying the genomes of newly discovered species.
cDNA libraries are incredibly useful for understanding which genes are active in a cancer cell versus a healthy cell, helping us identify targets for drugs. Conclusion: a genomic library is a fundamental tool that allows scientists to store, replicate, and search through an organism's entire genetic blueprint. It's the difference between having an entire encyclopedia locked in a vault and having a searchable, copyable version at your fingertips.
So if I'm a researcher and I want to study the promoter region of a gene, which library should I use?
The genomic DNA library, definitely.
Why?
Because promoter regions are regulatory sequences. They are not transcribed into mRNA, so they would not be present in a cDNA library at all. The cDNA library only has the information that gets made into protein. For anything non-coding, you need the genomic library.
You said the DNA is cut into overlapping fragments. Why is the overlap important?
The overlap is absolutely critical, especially for sequencing a whole genome. Imagine you have a long sentence. If you cut it into non-overlapping words, you have no idea what order they go in.
True.
But if you cut it into overlapping phrases, like the quick brown and brown fox jumps, you can use the overlap, brown, to piece the original sentence back together.
So the overlaps are used to assemble the final sequence.
Exactly. That's how the entire human genome was pieced together from millions of small sequence fragments from a genomic library.
How do you find the specific book or gene you're looking for in this massive library?
That process is called screening the library. You use a probe.
Like the DNA probes we talked about in genetic screening?
The very same. You create a short radioactively or fluorescently labeled piece of DNA that is complementary to a part of the gene you're looking for. Then you introduce this probe to the library.
And it will stick to the right fragment.
It will hybridize or stick only to the bacterial colony that contains the DNA fragment with your gene of interest, making that colony light up. Then you can isolate that colony and study the gene.
Is a cDNA library from a brain cell the same as a cDNA library from a liver cell?
No, absolutely not. And that's their power. A brain cell and a liver cell have the exact same genomic library, the same complete set of genes.
But they use different genes.
Exactly. A brain cell expresses genes for neurotransmitters. A liver cell expresses genes for detoxification enzymes. So their cDNA libraries, which represent the expressed genes, would be completely different. It gives you a snapshot of what that cell is actually doing.
With modern superfast sequencing, are genomic libraries becoming obsolete? Can't we just sequence the whole genome directly?
That's a great question. For some applications, yes, direct sequencing is now so fast and cheap that making a library first is less necessary.
Okay.
However, libraries are still incredibly important. They are a stable, renewable resource. Once you have a good BSC library, you can go back to it for decades to study different regions. They are also essential for cloning specific large chunks of DNA for genetic engineering experiments. So they are not obsolete, but their primary role has evolved.
Let's do a final practice. Now pause and practice saying this part aloud. A genomic library contains all the DNA of an organism, while a cDNA library only contains the DNA copies of genes that were being expressed.
In short, genomic and cDNA libraries are essential archiving tools that allow scientists to store and retrieve specific pieces of an organism's genetic code for detailed study.
तो दोस्तों ये था हमारा ह्यूमन जेनेटिक्स की दुनिया में एक सुपर डिटेल्ड सफर.
What a ride!
It really was. We covered a lot of ground.
हमने देखा कि साइंस कितनी आगे बढ़ चुकी है.
Today we try to understand key insights in human genetics.
हाँ, बिल्कुल. एक क्विक समरी बनाते हैं.
Go for it.
जीन थेरेपी. हमने देखा कि जीन्स को ऑगमेंट करके डिजीजेस को ठीक किया जा सकता है.
Right.
जेनेटिक स्क्रीनिंग. हमने समझा कि जेनेटिक रिस्क को कैलकुलेट करना पॉसिबल है, लेकिन इसके साथ एथिकल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज भी आती हैं.
A big responsibility.
जेनेटिक लोड. ये कॉन्सेप्ट बताता है कि जेनेटिक वेरिएशन भले ही उसमें हार्मफुल जीन्स हों, पॉपुलेशन के सर्वाइवल के लिए जरूरी है.
The double-edged sword.
लॉ एंड एथिक्स. सबसे बड़ा सवाल, कैन वी पेटेंट लाइफ? हमने इसके प्रोज एंड कॉन्स देखे.
A debate that's still raging.
प्रोबेबिलिटी एंड स्टैटिस्टिक्स. ये वो टूल्स हैं जिनके बिना जेनेटिक प्रेडिक्शंस पॉसिबल नहीं है.
The math of heredity.
जीन मैपिंग. ह्यूमन जीनोम प्रोजेक्ट जैसे एफर्ट्स ने हमें हमारे जेनेटिक रोड मैप को समझने में हेल्प की है.
Google Maps for our DNA.
जीन एडिटिंग. क्रिस्पर एक गेम चेंजर है जो डीएनए को एडिट करने की पावर देता है, लेकिन डिजाइनर बेबीज जैसे एथिकल कंसर्न्स भी लाता है.
Immense power. Immense responsibility.
जीनोमिक लाइब्रेरी. फाइनली हमने देखा कि एक ऑर्गेनिज्म के पूरे जीनोम को कैसे स्टोर और सर्च किया जाता है.
Perfect recap. अब listeners के लिए कुछ food for thought. We have 6 content probes.
लेट्स हियर देम.
1. अगर आपको जीन पैटेंटिंग पर एक 1-मिनट स्पीच देनी हो तो आप फॉर या अगेंस्ट बोलेंगे. अपने मेन पॉइंट्स तैयार करो. 2. CRISPR-Cas9 सिस्टम को एक नॉन साइंस फ्रेंड को कैसे समझाओगे. एक सिंपल एनालॉजी सोचो. 3. जीन ऑगमेंटेशन और जीन रिप्लेसमेंट में से फ्यूचर में कौन सी टेक्नोलॉजी ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट ला सकती है और क्यों? 4. जेनेटिक काउंसलिंग में कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी का एथिकल डिलेमा कितना कॉम्प्लेक्स है, एक सिनेरियो इमेजिन करो। 5. ह्यूमन जीनोम प्रोजेक्ट को एक हिस्टोरिकल इवेंट की तरह प्रेजेंट करो, उसके 2 मेन इम्पैक्ट्स क्या थे? एंड 6. डीएनए लाइब्रेरी और cDNA लाइब्रेरी में क्या मेन डिफरेंस है और एक रिसर्चर कब कौन सी यूज करेगा?
गुड क्वेश्चंस। और अब एक चैलेंज।
ओके
आपका चैलेंज, जीन ड्राइव टेक्नोलॉजी के 2 पॉजिटिव और 2 नेगेटिव पोटेंशियल आउटकम्स पर 50 वर्ड का नोट लिखो। थोड़ा सोच लो, दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट, इट कुड चेंज एंटायर इकोसिस्टम्स।
ब्रिलियंट। अगर ये डिस्कशन आपको पसंद आया तो हमें सपोर्ट करने के लिए इस चैनल को सब्सक्राइब जरूर करना
हाँ, और कमेंट करके बताओ कि आपको सबसे ज्यादा शॉकिंग या इंटरेस्टिंग फैक्ट कौन सा लगा।
और इसे अपने क्यूरियस दोस्तों के साथ शेयर करना मत भूलना। मिलते हैं अगले डिटेल सेशन में।
तब तक
कीप लर्निंग।